Welcome to day 8 of Inktober 25, Zentangle edition. And here on the Tangles and Toons channel, we have been working on a full page composition that will contain all the tangles for the entire month. And so we're ready to begin the tangle for day 8. Are you ready, Gayle?
Ready.
All right, then let's get started. So the tangle pattern for day 8 here in Inktober is called Cochombros by Tania Jover. And it is really a neat pattern, actually. It's sort of a optical illusion of sorts, and it has a wide variety of how it can be drawn and shaded in particular to create different effects. But before we start to draw it, we want to think for a moment about our composition. Now, in Zentangle in general, you don't plan out your composition in the traditional sense because you're just adding these patterns as they come, especially if you're working on the standard tiles. You just draw your border, your string, and then you fill those areas. But there's nothing wrong with thinking about it and trying to make the composition as interesting or pleasing as possible. So one thing, because Cochombros is a linear, as I call it, or a hard edge tangle, it does have sort of a star format. Here, I'll just show you a quick outline of one. It looks kind of like a star, but we'll get into the details, but it's lots of edges. There's not a lot of flowing or curved lines. In fact, there's no curved lines if we draw it in the traditional step-out way. So I don't want to group all of those star patterns or those hard line patterns right next to each other. I think that wouldn't look as nice. So I'm actually going to put it up here on mine, and then I can build some of the more flowery or wavy or curvy tangles in around it and just nestle them wherever. And it gives me some more flexibility. Now you can put yours wherever you'd like, but that's just the thought process behind where I'm going to place mine. So let's take a look here at this tangle itself. And I want to pull these cards out here. I want to show you, I did a couple prelim drawings just so you could see. So this is the actual pattern that the step out conveys. And I've got written here 3 lines. Let me zoom in here. The reason I say 3 lines is because our initial drawing is 1, 2, 3 lines. And then that creates this pattern here. And I did this very quickly, so it's not very straight or steady, but there it is. But here's one with 4 lines. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it creates the same optical illusion, but with just more points to the star, so to speak, or more edges that we can be concerned with. So you can draw either of these shapes in exactly the same way. It just depends on what you'd like to do with it. Now I want to jump ahead for a moment about shading, because the shading will determine, or maybe help you to determine, how you want to draw yours. So these here, these 4 that are indicated there, are all the 3-line version. And you can see there's a variety of ways we could shade it. You can focus on that center star shape. You can focus on some edges and just creating that particular illusion. You can shade sides and faces or front pieces. So here's this side of this little bar. Here's this side of this little bar, and so on. And you can just create a little pattern that way, or you can just shade what I call the top edge of each of these little bars and leave everything else as it is. Now this one happens to be based on the 4-line version, so instead of 6 little points it has 8, and it allowed me to do a little bit different shading where I alternate the edges and I alternate the faces of that little star to create a completely different look. So I wanted to show you that in advance because it may influence what you want yours to look like and what version you're going to draw. So now, how do we actually draw this? Well, let me get my paper centered here and we'll show you. I've decided in my case to use the 8-point version. And so that's the one I'm going to show you. But again, the process is identical. You'll just have a couple less points to draw if you choose the other version. So, and I would recommend too, in fact, let me pull out a little post-it note. I would recommend maybe practicing this once or twice before you lay it on your paper, unless you're familiar with it already, because it can be a little tricky to get all the angles to work out. So if you're doing the 4-line version with the 8 points, I should say, you can start very simply by making a line and then a cross line perpendicular, very, very simple. And then we draw 2 more lines that just intersect or dissect that. And that gets us our basic pattern. Then we're going to draw up to the center, like imagine the center point here, and down, and we're going to create points on all of these lines that we've drawn. And again, this is the 4-line version. And I'm just creating a little star shape that forms the center of this geometric pattern, or this optical illusion. And this is, I'm just doing it quickly to give you an idea of how this is drawn. So now we've got that basic center shape. Now what we do is we pick a side. By this, let's just look at a point here. There's the top. So we have a left and a right side. So pick one. Left side I'll pick. I'm going to take that line and I'm going to extend it here to here, and here to here should be roughly the same length. So then I go, and I'm on the left side, so I skip the right side, and I go to the left side again, and I extend that line. Again, this length is that length, approximately. And I just go all the way around this star, extending those lines, those left side or left edges of that point. That's the best way that I could think to explain this. Left edge extending out, and we do this all the way around. So find your point, find the left edge, extend that out. Now, once we have that done, we end up with a shape that looks like this. From there, we want to find the point again. So here's the point. And now we want to create a parallel line to the neighboring point. So we're going to start straight out and go out to here, but we're going to stop a little short. We don't want to make these lines even. We want to make them look at this angle. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going over here like that. Then I'm going to turn this a bit. I'm going to find that point, and I'm going to parallel this line. Turn, go to that tip, parallel that line, or aura it if you want to think of that, but it's technically not an aura here since it's so far away from that line. We're just creating a corollary line that is parallel. So I'm drawing that out. And you see I'm not going quite out because I want to retain this angle a little bit. But I'm just doing this exact process all around the shape that we've drawn. All right, now we end up with that. Now there's two ways you can do this here. I'll show you the way I like to do it. So now look at one of these lines. Pick any of them, it doesn't matter. The one that's on this side closest here. And I look across and I want to try to simulate that these lines, they're not necessarily the same, but I want to give an angle that looks like they might connect, and then I'm just going to connect this. And you could do that the opposite. I could say I'm going to close these edges up, these two parallel lines, and then I'm going to draw a line that looks like it connects there. So close this up. I want to just connect that point. Close that up and connect. So we repeat that all around the entire shape, the entire pattern. Connecting these. Close that. Connect that angle. Close it and connect it. And voila, we have Cochombros, at least in a 4-point, 4-line, 8-point. See, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's because we drew 4 lines. And then the optical illusion, of course, is that if we look at each piece, this looks like it's one piece, the top, the front, and the side. But then as we look here, here's where the optical illusion comes in. We have the top and the front and the side, but in this case, the front of this one is actually the side of this one. So that's where it's really an interesting shape. And we can highlight that through our shading, or we can highlight the star pattern in the middle, or we can do some combination thereof. But that is Cochombros. And so one other quick side lesson. So if you're doing the 3-line version, what you want to do is draw an X first. Instead of starting like this, we're going to start with an X. And the reason is these two are narrower or closer together because when we draw that 3rd line, we want all of these to be the same. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we can create that same pattern that we did with our other one, and drawing our lines. But I just wanted to show you that little difference. So let's get onto our composition now and actually start adding. And one last thing, not only do I recommend maybe practicing that, but it is also not a bad idea, if you're uncomfortable with it, of drawing your initial star or your initial shape with a pencil and then just go over it with your ink pen, because that can really help to avoid, you don't want to, at this point, you've done all this work so far, you don't want to make an error that you're frustrated with. So think that out and let's keep drawing. Okay, so I'm going to put mine, like I said, right about here. And since I am doing the 4-line version, I'm going to start with that cross shape. Just like that. Then I divide that. Now, since I just went through the explanation in more detail, I'm just going to draw here. I won't lecture you on exactly what I'm doing every step of the way. And you can just rewind the video if you need to see that breakdown. But you can also just watch this. We won't be in a rush. I am going to try to turn the paper a little more slowly so you can see the process that's going into play here. It's a little different with a tile or a post-it, because I can't spin my piece of paper quickly without losing you on camera here. All right, remember here at this point when we're drawing those extending lines, just pick a side. And if you pick the other side, you would just do it in the opposite direction. I didn't point that out, but I like to just go from the left. It just makes it a little easier for me since I'm right-handed. Once we have our little spinning wheel there, then we go back to that point and we draw those parallel lines. And once we have that, we can either draw this line first or we can close these. Some people prefer to close this up first, all these little parallel lines, just so they don't get confused with what edges they're connecting. And that, to me, is a fair process choice. So then you end up with something that looks like that. And now we're just going to draw those points down. And this connecting line here, I don't want that to be a point of confusion. It's just it helps to create a continuity of that shape. If I drew it out here or in real tight, it would still have a generally acceptable effect, but it wouldn't look quite as cohesive, in my opinion. Those pieces wouldn't look like they're actually part of the same thing. And the optical illusion gets lost a little bit. In fact, if you took a real long time and were very precise in your lines, you could make sure that the angles here were exactly the same, and that would create an even further illusory type look. But it's not necessary for us to be worried about those kind of things. Just commenting as a point of interest. And there we go. So the shape is done. The basic shape is already in place. And now we can move on to our shading process. So you can get your pencil. I'm using a 4B pencil, just happened to grab the one on my desk. It allows me to be a little darker in those areas, kind of like I showed, if I want to differentiate lighter versus darker shading. But I actually think, in my case, I'm going to do something more like this. I just like to have a little more tonal variety on the shading, so that's what I'm going to do. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to look at my star here, and I'm going to shade every other of these little inner points. So I'll just pick one to begin with. It doesn't matter which one. And I'll lay some graphite in there that I'll blend with my tortillon. Then I skip one and do the same thing again. Now once I've got that, if you're going to shade like I am, what I'm looking at here is this is not only those star points, but it's also the front face of this little bar here. So wherever I've shaded, I'm going to vary this. So this is shaded in the front, so now I'm going to add a little shading to the top of that bar, but in the back, on the far edge, the farthest away from this shading. So here I've got this. Now on this one, there is no shading on the front face, so I'm going to shade here. And this is not a light sourcing methodology here. This is just trying to create some interesting shading that plays on these optical illusions. So the front here is shaded, the front of this piece, so I shade the back of that one. And now here, the front is not shaded, so I'll shade the front of the top edge on that one. So I'm just alternating here, front and back. So I've laid the graphite in. Grab my tortillon. In fact, I want to try something here. I'm going to turn my one light off. I think you can see that a little bit better. So I'm going to leave that off just for a moment while I'm doing the shading, because the bright light, which is nice for the camera, it washes out the graphite often. I think that's good to go. So let me zoom out here, and you can kind of see the overall composition thus far. And it just looks like it's floating over there by itself, but that's okay. I want to create, again, that variety of placement so that the eye is moving around throughout the composition once we're all done. All right. Gayle, how are you doing?
I'm all done.
You're done as well?
Yep.
Let's take a look. Did you do the 4? Yep, you did the 4 option also.
And I was going to shade it differently, but then I liked how you were doing it, so I just followed along.
you kept the example there. That's fine. Yeah, sometimes that's the way it look. You like the look and you go for it. So there's ours side by side. We did it roughly the same size this time. Yours is maybe slightly larger, but I think it looks good. So there was my overall composition so far. And there is Gayle's composition so far. So that's it for today, folks. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone again tomorrow for day 9 of Inktober. Until then, take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.